Hey everyone, you're watching another episode of In Studio, and today's special guest is Kris Bowers. Hey man, how are you?
Good, Brian.
Thank you for coming in.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Congrats on your recent engagement.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So much to talk about today. You're obviously featured in the most recent episode of our Magic Hour series, which is incredible. If you haven't checked it out, definitely go watch it. I have to talk about Green Book, but I kind of want to talk about your start and what's the most interesting about you. I mean, there's so many things interesting about you, but what's beyond interesting is that what was decided for you was decided before you were even born, kind of.
Yeah.
Can you kind of talk about that and kind of how this career was kind of decided for you and how early of an age you started at?
Yeah. My parents were kind of the opposite of everybody else's parents, and they wanted me to be an artist. And I think in the beginning, it really came from probably the fact that my dad wanted to be a drummer when he was in high school, and my grandfather just wasn't having it. It wasn't even an option for him. And my parents were really big on making sure that I did as much extracurricular activity as possible. So like, in addition to playing piano, I was also playing sports. I was drawing. I was doing all these other things. But piano specifically, I think, was something that my parents and maybe even more so my dad really wanted me to be and to do. And so yeah, before I was born, they were like pulling piano CDs and like playing them for my mom's stomach and stuff. And they really did a great job of trying to find the best schools, the best teachers, and make sure that I had the best access I could as early as possible. Yeah. It
was almost like you were destined for this, which is incredible.
Yeah. It's pretty wild. I feel like I'm confused by it perpetually, and I just try not to ask questions just in case I jinx it.
Now, one thing I've read that is, you said that your dad pushed you a lot, and when you were younger in school, he kind of compared you to other students, and when you performed in the White House, he even said to you, oh, you're only doing 2 or 3 songs. Can you kind of talk about that push and what drove you and like what decisions you were able to make to make it your story and your career?
Yeah, I mean, it was funny because that Hollywood Reporter thing that you guys did, the Magic Hour thing, the video of me playing when I was 6, my dad found it in the attic and like went through the whole thing, and they sent it to me, and I was like, oh, thanks so much. And my dad was like, oh yeah, well, you know, the funny thing is that that's not the whole video. And I was like, what do you mean? And my mom was like, well, you don't remember that? And I was like, no, I was 6. And after that video, and of course it's me at 6 playing piano like that, my dad proceeded to tell me about why this other girl in the class was better than me, why like I need to practice more and all this stuff. And that early on, he was always trying to find somebody that he would make me look at and make me pay attention to and see whether or not they, or what it was that they were doing that was getting them maybe further than I was at that point. And of course, like, you know, there are all kinds of things that are that maybe are issues with that like, you know, I'm dealing with in therapy, but and my dad and I are fine now. Like, there's no issues there. But the thing is, what it really did though is have me constantly question what it is that I could be working on. And what that developed into later in life was like, I started to look at not my peers, but I started looking at my favorite pianists and my favorite musicians, my favorite composers, and saying, I wasn't in my mind competing with like, you know, so-and-so in my that was also in 9th grade with me. I was looking at Brad Mehldau or Herbie Hancock or Keith Jarrett, and those are the people that I was looking at as like my competition. And they were so far obviously ahead of me that it made it so that I was just constantly moving the needle forward and trying to figure out what I needed to do to get better and constantly self-analyzing. And I think that was probably the most beneficial thing that came out of that constant pitting me against somebody else in competition.
And even at the age of 12, you knew you wanted to go into film composition. And
yeah,
what were the early films that you watched as a kid that made you want to get into this?
I mean, obviously, like all the Spielberg movies from my childhood, they just like shaped my life, you know, and my dad also happened to be a big fan of a lot of the other films that John Williams scored. So like whether it was Star Wars or Indiana Jones, and those films were really big for him. And so he showed me those films when I was pretty young and wanted me to enjoy those franchises. But I also really fell in love with Jurassic Park and E.T. and Home Alone and all these things that, for me, when I watched those films, those were the films and that was the sound with John Williams that I would go listen to outside of the context of the movie and still like feel all the same feelings and get this excitement and all that kind of stuff. And still to this day, you listen to that music and immediately I'm transported back to when I was like 8 years old, 9 years old, seeing those movies. And so those were kind of the types of movies that early on started to shape my desire to be a composer.
Now for Green Book, How did you first get involved with the film?
Yeah, so first it came from a few different channels, avenues, yeah. So Tom Wolfe and Manish Raval, who are the music supervisors for the film, who are incredible, and they did such a great job with like creating this world and this period with all the songs they chose. They're also really integral with trying to find composers for the projects that they work on. And so they were one of the first people that really pitched me for this, along with my agent and a couple of other people who found out about me, and I think that the producers had like just done their own research, but Manish and Tom and my agent were kind of the ones that really put me in front of these people as somebody that might be able to handle all the different aspects of the job, with like the piano playing, the composing, and teaching Mahershala and all that. And
she did flawlessly.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it was definitely, as soon as I had that first meeting, they're like, yeah, can you handle all this stuff? Can you can you handle learning the piano music and all that? And I was like, yeah, sure, that'll be easy, that'll be fine. And then I went and listened to Don Shirley's music, and I was like, holy cow, what did I get myself into? And this is really tough.
And in terms of listening to his music, you didn't have you transcribed everything from listening to it. So can you kind of talk about how is that possible? How do you do that?
Yeah, well, again, that's something that I just happen to be very prepared for. Yeah. I mean, that's how I learned how to play music, was mostly by ear. I mean, I obviously had to learn how to read sheet music when I was really young. I started that when I was like 6. But to learn jazz, the only way you can really learn that is by listening to it and by trying to emulate the other people. And you're trying to capture more than just the notes. You're trying to capture the way that this person's touch is on the piano, the way that it feels when they play something, and the way to transcribe something is to try to transcribe all of that, and that's the best way. It's just like learning a language. Yeah. You don't learn a language by reading it. You learn it by hearing it, talking to people, and really doing it. And so having to do that for this film really was just like I was back in school. Like I was just transcribing stuff. I had to do that every day when I was at Juilliard, and I think that I was used to that part of it. That was actually the easier part. The harder part was learning, then getting it up to speed. Because when I transcribe it on the piano and I listen. It's just really listening, trying it, listening again, like over and over and over again. And then after I finally figure out what the notes are, then it's just about trying to practice it and get it up to speed and get it so that it feels natural to me playing.
Now, the film is so powerful. What scenes would you say kind of stuck out to you the most in terms of its impact on the audience, its impact on John's story? What would you say, I guess?
Yeah, I think a few things. One of the first scenes I wrote to is a scene where Mahershala gets out of the car, where they have some car trouble, and Tony Vigo's character is putting some water into I don't know cars well enough to know where he's putting the water, but he's doing something under the hood, and Don gets out of the car and just kind of stands there, and there are all these field workers that are that kind of stop what they're doing, and they look at this black man that obviously is dressed in a way that they maybe haven't really seen before, and he's being driven around by a white man, and that's even more surprising to them. And
they have a lot of those scenes of like...
Yeah, just that recognition of like, wow, that person is different than... the same, but different. And the same thing for Don's character in those moments where he realizes that these people are the same, but I'm very different. And the recognition, but yet still like this isolation that you could feel in that moment, and in the way that Mahershala plays that moment, that was the first scene for me that I could really sink my teeth into, because in general I can relate to that story. I can relate to the idea of like always feeling like you don't belong in either side when you might be a person of color but then didn't maybe grow up in that environment as much, or whatever it is, whatever reason why you might feel uncomfortable. So I could relate to that, but that moment was the first moment that it really had an impact on me, and so that was kind of the first moment that I started writing to.
Now, one of the other amazing things to come out of this film is your relationship now with Mahershala Ali, and him praising you, and every chance he gets. He recently just brought you on stage at the Critics' Choice Awards. Can you kind of talk about that and working with him and how it's been, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it's all been pretty wild. You know, I think you work on these projects sometimes, and you have some moment where you might be able to interact with an actor, and they're worried about so many other things that as a composer, I'm kind of like, I'm here to help you, but obviously like I'm not expecting to generate a real friendship, at least not that quickly. And from the first day, we hung out for like 3 hours, and we hung out, and he was playing piano for 3 hours, playing a C major scale over and over again, and then afterwards we walked around and we talked about, he asked me like what I've been up to and like a little bit about my backstory. We like walked into a couple of like clothing stores and stuff like that, and and I was probably trying to act normal. I don't know if he thought that I was normal in that first meeting, but afterwards I was like, holy cow! I just like hung out with Mahershala Ali, and I've been a fan of his for a long time, and same with Vigo. Like anytime I was on stage with them, I was like where am I? What's going on? And so for him to not only be that open from the very beginning, and then to be as dedicated as he was to trying to get this role as right as possible and as specific as possible, and all the way down to how should his posture be, where should his hands be, how should his hands be shaped. And,
posture.
yeah, I know. My posture is really bad. All those things were things that he was obsessing over, and then even helping me with where we were on set, and he was like, you know what, when you play, can you actually like maybe lean forward when you do this part, and maybe like just straighten your back a little bit more during this section, and it really became we became a team trying to figure out how to best represent Don Shirley, at least when he was at the piano. And I just had so much respect and awe and admiration for him to have to memorize these lines and figure out all these things, and then have to play this or act like playing this incredibly difficult music and play some of it, and then have to act like it's all normal. It was pretty wild to see him do all that and do it so flawlessly.
That's so great. And then obviously next up is the Oscars, and I'm predicting and hoping you get many shout-outs, because I'm sure they're coming your way. Next up, we're going to play a game. It's kind of our staple game here. It's called Fishing for Answers. Are you up for that?
I'm definitely down.
Awesome. Can you fish? Are you a good fisher?
I've actually only fished twice in my life.
I've never really fished.
Yeah, my grandfather used to fish all the time. My dad's allergic to fish.
Oh, really?
Go figure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can just grab.
All right, let me get a good one.
We'll do the whole bowl too. So.
Oh, the whole bowl. Yeah. Wow. Okay. What is your hidden talent?
So we know what you are really talented at.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that maybe people don't know?
No. Actually, maybe I'm pretty good with like visual things. I wanted to be a cartoonist when I was younger, but I don't do that at all anymore. But I think it's still translated into. I usually make all like my own flyer, all of my own concert posters, or like a lot of my artwork. A lot of times is like designed by me and like all that kind of stuff. And I get really obsessive with like trying to design visual things, and so maybe that's, I don't know if it's a talent, but that's hidden.
I'll grab another one.
All right. Mahershala Ali has praised you for your work with him on Green Book. Will we see you and him work together again, and what will that look like? Yeah, I hope so. We've been talking about, at some point doing that together. I think it's more so like whenever our schedules allow. I mean, he's incredibly busy, and I'm getting busier, but right now we're talking about going to see some like music together, or trying to like decompress and be able to enjoy life a little bit together. But there's a couple things that he's had in mind, and some things that I have in mind. So I'm sure there'll be some work done together at some point.
And I feel like it's genuine in the sense where you both really do want to work together again. So it will likely happen.
Yeah, definitely. That's the hope.
That's great. You can just toss those anywhere.
Nice. Just throw them around. Favorite Aretha Franklin song.
So can you tell the story about when you met her at the...
So I did this competition called the Thelonious Monk Piano Competition.
Which you won.
Yeah, that I won. Thank you. And in 2011, and she was receiving like a Lifetime Achievement Award when that happened. And I did the semifinals, and after I finished playing, somebody was like, "Oh, do you mind coming out to meet somebody?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, sure, whatever." And as I'm walking out, they're like, "Oh, by the way, it's Aretha Franklin you're about to meet." And I was like, "Oh, okay." It's a little different. And it's one of the only times I've been speechless. Like, I've met some pretty cool people, and I met her, and all I kept saying was, I'm such a big fan. I'm such a big fan of yours. And so she asked for my information, and then
you stayed in touch.
Yeah, exactly. So like a little bit after the competition, she ended up calling me randomly. I had no idea who she was or who it was, and I answered the phone, and she started talking to me. And at some point, I put together that it was Aretha Franklin that was talking to me, and then we kind of developed this relationship where I was playing at her birthday parties, at her Christmas parties, and like a bunch of different things for her. But favorite song, I would have to say maybe her version of Mary Don't You Weep on the Amazing Grace album. Yeah. It's like that album is by far one of my favorite albums of all time, and her singing on that track, and that track just, you can hear the church, you can hear like everybody with her as the song builds and grows, and it's a pretty emotional experience listening to that album. Yeah.
Can't sing that.
Yeah. All right. Looking back, what's one thing you would tell your younger self? I would say just to, one, be patient, which I still have to tell myself now. but also just to trust myself more. You know, I think that like in general, I was always questioning whether or not I was like doing the right thing when it came to like progressing in music or working on my music or trying to figure out like what my style was or how I would approach composition or how would I approach improvising and stuff like that. And kind of going back to my dad, I think for a long time I was constantly like comparing myself to others, but in an unhealthy way. I think there's a healthy way to do that and a way to do that where you're not making yourself feel worse as you're trying to figure out the things you can build on. And I think that, like I probably had a time in my life where that was difficult because I wasn't being kind to myself as I was trying to figure out what to work on. And so I think just trying to figure out how to be kinder to myself, you know, I think would have been the thing I would have told younger me.
That's awesome.
All right. If you could go on a road trip with anyone, who would it be? I mean, other than my fiance, because if I don't say that, I don't know, she'll be my fiance anymore. Man, that's a tough one. I'd have to say maybe Bill Murray. That's random.
Okay.
Like, yeah, I feel like he would be a fun person to go on a.
Did you see the Golden Globes moment?
Yeah, with the cheersing and stuff. Yeah, I feel like he's a character and he'd just be entertained the entire time.
That'd be an interesting ride, you too.
Yeah.
He's probably the best person to go on a road trip, actually, now that I think about it.
First impression of Kanye West.
So, working on Watch the Throne, can you kind of talk about that experience? And
yeah, so it all happened because I happened to be working with Q-Tip a lot at the time, and so he was asked to work on some of the songs for Watch the Throne as they were finishing it up, and they asked me to come in to add some just additional keys and synths and stuff like that. And I think the most interesting thing about seeing him work was just one, how specific he was, but in a way that I started to understand a little bit more. You know, I think that he can kind of be talked about or made fun of because of how specific he is, but there's a moment where I was playing through something on the piano and I started changing some of the chords because I was like, I'm a jazz musician and I'm playing these like chords that are pretty simple and I kind of want to change it up for myself. And as he's trying to sing along and I changed the chord, out of nowhere he's like, why are you playing such like abstract chords? Like, why are you changing the chords? And in my mind in the beginning I was like, I mean, these are the same chords. Like, what are you talking about? And then Q-Tip was like, just play, like, just stick to the triads. And then later, Kanye explained to me where he was like, yeah, when you change those notes, like, I can't hear the melody that I'm singing anymore. And, like, it totally changes the color of the chords for me. Now that chord is something different. Like, I feel something different when I hear that chord. And so now I want to sing something different, but I was trying to, like, find this thing with the chords you were playing. And when you changed it, it just totally changed the way that I heard it. And that actually made me all of a sudden respect, I mean, even just, like, pop music on a different level. Because I think for me, I had always thought as a jazz musician that, like, it was simpler, but it's not simpler because it can't be more complex. It's simpler because there's a reason for it. There's a feeling behind it, or there's just more specificity than I thought there was to it. And so it made it so that as I was approaching more popular music, I was trying to approach it with a different level of respect, which I think was pretty cool to get from that.
Last one, which is actually the funniest one, I think.
I
don't know. Yeah, I don't know how it ended up last. We lucked out.
Have I ever eaten a pizza like Tony Vallelonga? Man, first of all, I'm lactose intolerant, which sucks. Yeah, this is not
so funny. Not that funny.
You a little angry, actually. No, I mean, I used to eat pizza a lot. I used to eat cheese a lot. I didn't become lactose intolerant until like college, and I used to be a really chubby kid. Like I was between middle school and high school, I probably lost like 80 pounds. And it was probably because in middle school, every single day I ate a personal pizza and a cherry Coke almost every day, which is not healthy at all. Yeah, so I did fold that, but it was an individual pizza.
Fold it
so.
and like
yeah, I've never eaten a full.
He had so many quirks in the movie that were just so
and the cool thing is like apparently that came out of Vigo just hanging with the family. Yeah. They were at a pizza place and somebody told him that that's how Tony used to eat pizzas, and so he went back to Pete and he was like, can I do that in the film? And he's like, you can try it once, and if it works the one time, then like sure, we can keep it in there. And they did it once, and of course like obviously it stayed in because it's just so specific and funny.
Seriously, thanks so much for coming in. This was great.